Hi. Thanks, Stephanie. And thank you, Natalie, for having this dialogue with me.
Oh, I'm so excited. I couldn't wait. So I have to say, we did our little pre-meeting where we talked a little bit. And at the last 5 minutes that we were talking about this amazing book, I had a gentleman came to my house. He was doing some work for me and he overheard the conversation. And he mentioned another text. He was like, "Oh, you're talking about," he was like, "What do you teach Black history?" And so we got into this whole conversation about Blackface and what he had studied. And he mentioned this other text that I actually use in my African American Issues and Communication class at Howard. So anyway, just to say is your book is already like he really was looking forward to hearing more about this. And so hi, Greg, if you're watching.
See, I feel like that's like such a great DC moment too, right? Like
everybody's engaged. Yes, they
yes,
could be,
exactly.
spraying for bugs, whatever. There, people want to talk about policy. They want to talk about issues. Yeah, that's definitely very DC. So, the first thing I wanted to say about this adorable book, not it's weird to call it adorable. Is that right to call it adorable? I don't know, but it's so little and so cute that I absolutely love the series, because how we are, the scholars, we're long-winded, we use way more words than we need to talk about very simple things. And somehow Bloomsbury's done this series, Object Lessons, which is sort of like distilling some pretty complicated and deep things, but into like this little cute, digestible, stick it in your pocket form. So
Yeah, I mean,
how did you come to get involved in this?
well, I mean, I've admired the series for a long time, and have several of the titles just like at home, because I do like the way that it's pitched to a general readership, complex scholarship, but in a public facing way. I did not think I had this kind of book in me, but one of my colleagues who's on the editorial board approached me and he goes, "I think you should do one of these object lesson books." And I was like, "Well, I've been thinking a lot about blackface, but I don't know if that's an object." And he was like, "I think it could work." And so here's my hubris. I was like, "All right, I'm going to write the book." He's like, "You're not going to write a proposal?" I was like, "No, I'm just going to write the book." I said, "I think I understand the format, so I'm just going to write it. And if you guys don't want it, that's okay. It'll be an experiment for myself." And I sent them the book. And the next day they were like, "Yes." So it's like, I was like, "Oh, you read it already?" They're like, "Yes, we will." So I feel very fortunate that I was invited into this amazing series, and that I had something that could fit into it.
But that's the thing, is that you can read, like they could have read it by the time, so like I spent a nice afternoon, reading this, going deep into Shakespearean history to find the roots of blackface in Europe, which I was
Yes.
pretty surprised.
Yes.
And, took a whole tour of all the recent controversies that have been around blackface, from Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister of my native Canada, and also, Governor Blackface, who I know somebody in his office who calls him that actually in Virginia.
We're talking about Ralph Northam, if you don't know.
Yeah. Or we'll just call him Governor Blackface, because
Governor
that's what he's
Blackface.
known by a lot of people, Governor Blackface in Virginia. So it's been in the news a lot. But the way that you open this was very personal. And so, there was a personal issue at your kid's school. So can you just talk a little bit about that? And
Yes.
yeah.
I had an experience at my son's school when he was in third grade, and this is in 2012. And they had to do this long research project on their hero, and then do a poster presentation, dress up as the hero, and answer questions as if they were that person. And it was a lot. Like, they weren't allowed to do it outside the home. All the work was done in school. And the only thing that the parents were involved with was getting the costume itself. So my son, my little brown son, was William Shakespeare, of course, because I'm a Shakespeare scholar. We talk about Shakespeare. He's seen a lot of Shakespeare. So he was like Shakespeare's my hero. My little brown son, it never occurred to him that he should apply white makeup to be William Shakespeare. That wasn't even in the realm of anything that we thought or talked about. But when I got to his school to see the poster presentations, three little white children were in full blackface, and they were Martin Luther King Jr., Serena Williams, and Arthur Ashe. And when I came upon the first one, I was like, keep my face neutral because this is an 8-year-old, right? Like, I was like, what, like, so I asked her questions about Martin Luther King. She answered them, and she was like clearly so proud. And there was no disconnect between the fact that she's wearing like black makeup all over her face and she's talking to a black woman about her hero. So I, was polite to her and then went immediately to find the principal and said, what's happening here? When did makeup become okay? How was this? How did we discuss this? So I don't understand. And he had no idea what I was asking him. And after a while I said, don't you think that you're allowing the children to veer dangerously close to minstrelsy? And he didn't know what minstrelsy was. And I was like shocked, but also really angry because this is our American history. And he was the principal of this very expensive private school. So why am I educating him about our American history? But then I had to, like, after I calmed down a little bit, I realized this is actually not a history that anyone, like, you're not going to get this in your high school class. You may get it if you go to Howard and you're like, but right, like this,
right.
Black and brown children at Howard with a few white students, but like, so this is not part of the American history that we frequently talk about outside of a few college classrooms. And I thought, well, you need to have a popular little book that's written for the lay audience that when this happens at your children's school, you can be like, here you go.
Bam.
Read this.
Educate yourself. I mean, I'm really good for giving people reading lists, who step wrong. But I mean, that's actually one of the tensions in the course. So, we talked about, so I teach in a doctoral program at Howard, and it's a communication, culture, and media studies. And one of our core required courses is African-American issues in communication. And that tension is one of the things that we're drawing all the way through the course and actually all the way through our curriculum at Howard. This idea that you have American issues in communication, and then you have African-American issues in communication. Really, they're all part of the same circle, right?
But it's only Black people who feel the need to know both. And it's like, actually, we all need to know, like everyone should be taking your class. That should be required of everyone.
It should be. I think so. But also, but I'm just thinking about like, okay, most people take a drama class at some point. Most people study Shakespeare at some point. Isn't this something, we could just sort of integrate it? Like, I'm all about how do we get to where we're moving from a marginal, we claim these stories as being marginal stories to the main story. And then when do we make them in the center of the story?
And Natalie, let me tell you something else. A couple of years ago, through a friend who writes for the New Yorker quite frequently, he introduced me via email to one of the editors. And I said, I want to write a short piece about Blackface. And the editor came back and he was like, it's not timely. And I'm like, well, I just read an article about Proust in the New Yorker. I don't understand how that's timely. But it was, again, it's like the treating this history, which is our history, our Black, white, Asian, Latinx, Native history, right? Like, as niche. It's not niche. Like, we all need to know this so that we can create something better in the future.
And so that thread from your principal's white innocence, you talk about that, and that thread sort of runs through these other contemporary, these things that were newsworthy, right? Which is Governor Blackface and Justin Trudeau. And I'm not sorry, he's Governor Blackface. Somebody, read. They also were like, well, we didn't know it. Oh my goodness. And then the way that they apologized around it, well, Justin Trudeau was a little bit better, of course. But Governor Black, this hurt people, and I'm sorry that it hurt other people, and I should have known that it would hurt other, it's like, well, no, actually it's hurting you because we're all in the same.
Right. And so
society.
Just to tie what you're saying back to the editor at the New Yorker, and I'm sorry I'm calling you out, the New Yorker. I am a longtime subscriber, but I just want to point this problem out. Like, if you turned on late night television in the 21st century, you were just as likely to see someone in blackface as you were to see an actor of color. So how is it not timely when every time I turned on Jimmy Fallon, Jimmy Kimmel, Saturday Night Live, Sarah Silverman, let alone all the politicians who were outed for their blackface that was on TV constantly, all the high fashion stuff that I cite in the last chapter of the book, Gucci, Prada, everybody's like got this weird blackface imagery on their high art. So I just don't, how is it not timely? How is it not part of our common discourse? And if it's not, we have no way of changing it. We have no way of moving forward. And to tie that into what you were saying about white innocence, there's a way in which people who get called out for being in blackface, whether it's part of their comic routine or a dance number that they did in the 1980s, they will always rely on the fact that they didn't know. Ralph Northam says, I didn't know about this harmful history. Okay, and even if we believe him, all right, you are a doctor, an educated man, you don't know, if you're from the South. How is it that you don't know this? But okay, isn't it your responsibility to know our history? Isn't it? Justin Trudeau at first said, oh, I didn't know how harmful it was. Then he kind of changed his tactics to say, it's actually because of my white privilege, which I think is right. It is about white privilege.
He had somebody good coaching him on that.
Oh, yes. Because I said, if you read his second long press statement about his numerous times in blackface, 3 that have been in the public record, it sounds like he took a page right out of Kimberly Crenshaw's book on intersectionalities. So he was highly coached.
Somebody was reading a lot. And so I think one of the questions that I had, and this is a thread that sort of runs through a lot of this book, is looking at the idea of blacking up versus cross-dressing, right? So speaking of intersectionality, could you just talk a little bit about how those two things are parallel and how they sort of like, are they in conversation with each other, and how do you see cross-dressing? Is it the equivalent of blackface? I mean, how would you sort of describe that relationship between those two concepts?
I don't think that they are equivalent, interestingly. I mean, they very interestingly, of course, come together in their birth at the same moment, which is on the Renaissance stage in Shakespeare's lifetime, when we have the first non-religious plays in English performed on public theater stages. So this is in the 1600s, late 1500s, early 1600s. And all the women's parts were performed by boy actors who were like the apprentices in the acting companies. And when they got older and their voice cracked, they would take over the male roles. And that was because they didn't assume that it was appropriate for women to act in public. And there are all these hilarious accounts of people going to continental Europe where women were on stage, and they say things like, the women on stage were almost as good as our boys at performing the women's part.
Question about that, actually. So you mentioned that before there were religious plays, were women allowed in those?
I actually don't think so. I think that was also but I don't know this for sure. So hopefully my medieval colleagues will correct me, but I think they were still all male performances because they came out of guilds. So like if you were a blacksmith, your guild would perform a specific religious drama. And so that would be all men, but there might be exceptions. But again, sorry, medievalist, you can correct me if I'm wrong. But yes, and we do have early examples of the use of Black prosthetics, makeup, like masks, wigs, etc., in those medieval religious plays, because when they had fallen angels who had been damned, once they were shown to be damned, they would have a blackened appearance. So this is, likening blackness with devilishness. But on the kind of Renaissance stage, we get lots and lots of characters who were supposed to be people of color, and that's Africans, Native Americans, people of Islamic faiths, Egyptians, Chinese, like we get a lot. And they're all performed by white men in racial prosthetics. Again, wigs, fake noses, makeup, visors or masks, stockings on their arms and legs. And a couple of scholars separately have tabulated there were at least 70 roles, 70 roles that were characters of color that were performed by white male actors. Wow. And so from the beginning, from the first moment of non-religious drama, characters of color were performed by white male actors. It was part of their property, performance property, as were the female roles. But by the 1660s, women were on stage performing the female role. So we get a switch pretty quickly. That's not true of actors of color as far as the archives have revealed to date. So we get this long performance tradition where Africans and Native Americans and other races were performed as caricatures in a way. And so that sets the stage for a tough dynamic if you're an actor of color, how to embody those roles going forward.
And I want to come back to that, the actors of color who did try to, but I want to give some dedicated time to that. But before we leave the cross-dressing, so women are able to get on stage fairly soon-ish.
Yeah, I mean, it's like within 100 years of the first secular theater, sorry.
Okay. But the actors are still, but they're still white men who continue to play female. So how did that continue? Like, were there cross-dressing?
Oh no, so that pretty much ends. There's like a little bit of overlap when the first female actors appear on stage. There were a few male actors who were still cross-dressing, but for the most part, women are playing women's parts. Okay. Now, if you get like much later, if you get like weird comedy shows like Harvard's Hasty Pudding, right? Like part of those like comedic traditions, theatrical traditions often involve cross-dressing. And I think that part of the making fun, caricaturing, making a stereotype of women does parallel the way that minstrelsy eventually works as well.
But it comes much later.
Much later, yes.
Yeah. Pretty contemporary, actually. So it sounds like what you're saying is,
Yeah.
So you talked about African bodies as status symbols in pre-colonial London. And on page 39, this was a sentence. You write, whites look more beautiful, rich, and luminous when placed in juxtaposition with the small, poor, and dullness of Black servitude. Ouch.
Ouch, right? So there are lots and lots of portraits from the Renaissance. And Kim Hall, shout out to her, and her great book, Things of Darkness, from Cornell in 1995. Hopefully everyone will continue purchasing that really important work. But she does all this work on these Renaissance portraits that show a lot of beautiful white women in the foreground. And then right next to them below their elbow will be what I'm going to term a slave, although the British are not accepting this term because they claim that they did not have slavery, which is a strange historical anomaly.
They just took it everywhere else around the world. So
they had it too.
And they had it too, yeah.
Yeah, and so that's where that sentence comes from, which is, saying that whiteness in some way was configured as beautiful because it was in juxtaposition to a Blackness that looked smaller and in a servile role.
Yeah. So, okay. So while we're at that, we're talking about London, there was an actor, and I'm trying to remember now, but you talked about who would come to the United States. It was a British actor, come to the United States, and you talked about him doing like almost like ethnographic research, which is, that's hard. Somebody who, I teach ethnography, and I feel like hopefully we've evolved and we're less colonizing in our practices now, but that was like he really studied. So could you talk a little bit about this actor who came and
Charles Matthews? Charles Matthews became famous for doing what's now called a protean farce, in which he would, in rapid fire succession, perform different characters from different walks of life. And his first shows, which were called the at-home sketches, he was famous from going from being like a Scottish woman to like a French urbanite to like kind of Cockney London type of accent. And he often did these very quick changes. And people said that his body looked as if it changed in these quick transformations from one character to the next. And he became very famous for this. And I think his first show, his first at-home sketch was in 1818. But he was looking for new material when Stephen Price, the manager of the Park Theater in New York, invited him to New York because he said, you'll get tons of material in the United States. So he came in 1822. And at first, Matthews was incredibly disappointed because he said that Americans all looked, talked, and dressed the same. He's like, there's no variety here. So he wasn't going to be able to like show off his protean farce techniques until he said he saw, and these are his words, specimens of Black gentry. And he claims to have gone to a Black theater. And there was a very famous Black theater in New York called the African Theater, run by William Brown, where Ira Aldridge, the famous Black actor, got his start. And at Howard, there's a theater named after
yes. And I was so happy to learn, for any of the Howard students that are or alum that might be coming, everybody knows about Ira Aldridge Theater. And I was, last month, years old, when I really learned about his history as a Shakespearean actor. So I hope we can come back to him.
We'll come back to him for sure. But so Matthews claims to have gone to this theater. We think he did. Mm-hmm. But the show that he debuted in 1824 in London had what I think many would assume to be a precursor to minstrelsy, in which he claims to have seen a production of Hamlet. By the way, the African Theater never put on Hamlet, so we know that that's not true. And he pretends to be a Black actor mispronouncing all the words in Hamlet. Talk about malaprops. He makes the African actors malaprops when it comes to Shakespeare. And this is part of the humor. Now, scholars debate, who study Matthews, debate whether or not he actually employed any racial prosthetics to his body. But the images of those performances from the time depict him as looking Black and having his body transformed into a large Black man. So whether or not that was just sort of part of the artist's imagination or whether it reflected an actual performance tradition, we don't know. But it was clear that he was mocking these Black actors mercilessly.
But was he also mocking the Scottish women and all these other characters that he was playing?
Yes. Yes. So I think that was part of the humor of his transformations, was making everything that was not white male neutral into humor.
A joke, right? Yeah. Ugh, that's painful, actually, to think about. Yeah, it's so terrible. Like, it just reminded me, there was an issue on Twitter. I don't know if you were sort of tuned into this, but Regina Bradley, who is a professor, I think she's at Georgia State, I can't remember, Red Clay Scholar on Twitter. She had there was a thing about last summer because they hired a white man to do the audio version of her book, and it sounded, and he did the Southern, and she spoke in like Southern dialect, and this was a Black woman character, and here this person was doing that, and this wasn't meant to be funny. And, she was just like, what is this? And it was a big thing that sort of blew up on Twitter. But I think that's the thing, is that, this idea is that you have this white male norm.
That's neutral.
That's neutral and normal. And everybody else is a joke and worthy of.
And that the white male neutral is entitled to inhabit, embody, perform vocally, and everything else, and that it can be fuel for humor. And this is where, I want to come back to Ira Alters, but this is where, like, for example, there were 4 episodes of 30 Rock, written by Tina Fey, who's a feminist and who's liberal, who, wants to create progressive humor. There were 4 episodes of 30 Rock that employed blackface when Barack Obama was president. That just tells you how deep the entitlement is when even the people who feel themselves to be progressive still do this.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like this taboo. And, you quote, like, I never had the nerve. I remember I was at the Root when that film, was it Tropic Thunder?
Yes, 2008 movie. Yep.
Yeah, I was at the Root. I remember we published an essay about that, and I never could watch it. But to read what you talk about, quoting Robert Downey Jr., and just sort of being thrilled.
My black friend said it was okay.
Right. So his black friend said it was okay, and he sort of talked about how thrilling it was. Like, are you kidding me? I got to be Black.
I got to be Black for the summer. That's his quote. Yep. Yeah. No, I mean, that's entitlement. That's also white innocence. You must believe that you are not racist and are pure of heart to have that sense of entitlement, right?
And also, I think also, the thing about blackface, you're also talking about sort of just racial ventriloquism, in general. And, we talked about this earlier, this debate I used to have with my husband about Trevor Noah, who does all of that, maybe similar to your British
Charles Matthews,
where, he's known for really nailing all of the different ethnic groups in South Africa. And he can, it's part of one of the things that got him, not beat up sometimes, is that he could do this, and he could sort of mix and just impersonate any group, right? And so here he is in the United States, and he has this daily show, and he does the Black accent too. And my husband, who's born in the United States, took great offense to it. He was like, he felt like it was like blackface. And I said, I don't know if that could be blackface because he's Black. So.
Oh, I think it can. I'm definitely on your husband's side. That I think, I'm not saying that Trevor Noah shouldn't do it, but I do think that there is a long history of Blacks doing blackface, both like actually in Black makeup, like Burt Williams, or to what I just call like the minstrel tradition that you see. I'm going to put it out there. I think Tyler Perry's films, the Medea films, are straight up minstrelsy.
And you got it's a twofer. You got the cross-dressing and the blackface all in one.
Yep. And this is not my term, so I'm stealing it from another scholar who terms it fat suit minstrelsy. And we get a lot of Black men, Black male comics, who play larger, older, kind of unsexualized Black women in fat suits. And she does this great reading and calls it fat suit minstrelsy. And I'm like, yes, that's exactly what it is.
Okay. So Tyler Perry is a good, let's just go here for a second. So how does the audience who the audience is, does it make a difference? Because I mean, part of what makes the blackface, it's part of like, okay, who the audience is, this sort of cross-racial, like, are they laughing with us or at us, inside the community, outside the community. So if you have Tyler Perry, who is serving almost entirely Black audiences, people like my mother-in-law, who just love Tyler Perry, love all the work that he does and support him. And they're not thinking about the white gaze. They don't have anything to do with white people. So how is it still blackface?
Well, I mean, I think that for me, and Tyler Perry argues precisely this point. He says, I'm writing for a Black audience. This is how we are. This is what we think is funny. These are the kind of spiritual arcs that are important for us. Like, and as you say, I don't think he's taking into consideration a white gaze at all. I think nonetheless that if that's the only humor that you can create, or that's the path towards a spiritual awakening that you want to use, using older white created versions of Blackness, that you will never get to be a three-dimensional Black person on film. Like, I don't think that that's the way you get there, even if Black people love it. I mean, I just think, how is that good for us?
Yeah, well, it's still, for whatever reason, though, it's still speaking to people, and I guess it's sort of like what I talk to my students about stereotypes, is that the reason why they still exist is because they're so powerful and they work. If you want to connect with, it's a shortcut to character development. If you want to connect with audience, if you have 30 seconds in a commercial, or if you have very limited people's Twitter attention span, if you want to grab them, use a stereotype. Yeah, because people think they already know who Big Mama is.
That's exactly it. And it's not like she doesn't get to have like a full life, a full history, a complex relationship with her body, her like community, like none of those things get worked out. And although I don't write about it in Blackface, I wrote about it in an earlier book. I think about Chris Rock. Chris Rock. No. Oh gosh, I'm blanking out. Never mind. I had a whole mind melt there.
The comedian.
Yes,
who about a comedian.
Yeah, who walked away from his Comedy Central.
Dave Chappelle.
So sorry. Sorry about that, because I was just actually reading a separate article about Chris Rock, who I find interesting too. But Dave Chappelle. When he was trying to send up a blackface routine with his Black Pixie routine, and he's on a plane, and they're like, do you want fried chicken or the fish? And the little Black Pixie, who it's him in blackface, is like, get the chicken, and Dave Chappelle said, like, here was my moment where I thought I could speak to a Black audience. We would all get this joke. We know why it's funny. We know why it's passé, but there was a white man watching in the filming, and he said, this guy laughed too long and too hard. And Chappelle said, I realized then what I thought I was sending up, I was just reifying, creating over and over again. And I think that's true of Tyler Perry's films as well. And regardless of whether it's about a white gaze or not, you're just reifying those stereotypes over and over again.
And I'm so glad, because I was thinking about Dave Chappelle a little while ago, so I'm glad you brought him up, because he's a wonderful example. And we wrote about him. I and Natalie Moore wrote a book many years ago called Deconstructing Tyrone, where we talked about that moment of him walking away. And he said, I wanted to make sure that I'm dancing and not shuffling.
That's exactly it.
And it's such a fine line, as creators, because, on the one hand, I feel I'm a purist when it comes to art. I feel like you don't have to uplift anybody. That's not your job. You're not like PR. Your job isn't to like do PR and, evolve whatever. Like, that's not actually what your job is as an artist. But when you do have people like Dave Chappelle, who go along this path, have a great amount of success, the easiest thing to do to gravity is to just keep falling, right? And just keep falling and just fall. And, he gets so much credit for just stopping, thinking about it, and providing really a teachable moment for both the public and also other artists, and look at how great his art is now. I mean,
yes, I totally agree. And what I think is important to stress here too is that I don't think there is a white equivalent. Like, I don't think white actors have a moment where they're saying, am I dancing or am I shuffling?
Right.
Like it does not exist, because all performance is available to them and their authenticity and their whiteness is never in question. That is
right.
not the case for actors of color, period.
Right. And so, so you end up having to do this extra labor that you don't get paid for. It's sort of grappling with all these things, and then for us as scholars, I mean, we're trying, especially like critical scholars, we're trying to. So what's great about this book is that it does deal with a lot of the contemporary issues. And so you see, this isn't just an academic issue, right? So like so you're giving us another historically rooted way to understand this phenomena, why it's problematic. And so when a Governor Blackface happens, you are thinking about, okay, well, what do we do? So question I have for you is, do you think that he should have stepped down? Do you think Justin Trudeau should step down? Like, does this rise to the level of should this determine who's in office, whether they engage in these in their white innocence?
I have to say I was shocked when Governor Northam did not step down. And I think he was the first public figure who was outed in that way who didn't step down. And I think he did make it easier for Justin Trudeau not to step down as well. I think Trudeau handled it quite differently, as we talked about before. He really leaned into saying, okay, this was about my white privilege and I should have known better, and I didn't because of my privilege. Northam doesn't seem to, I don't think he's had an awakening at all. So for me, I guess, I think if you're not outed and it doesn't transform you in some way to your relationship to race and your own positionality, then probably you should step down. But that's me as a Shakespeare professor, not a politician.
Well, I'm not a politician either. And actually, we talked about this a lot because I was actually teaching a seminar at the time. And a lot of the students were like, we had a lot of millennials that year, and they were like the super woke millennials. And they were really like, he needs to go. And what I felt is that I feel like, white people, it's like white people whiting, like that's a Tuesday, right? Like this is just a Tuesday. And what else has he done? Like, what is his policy platform? Who's going to replace it? Like there are degrees of evil, right? So it's something, I tend to look at these things as kind of sort of teachable moment, but does it rise to the level of, okay, I'd rather have Donald Trump clone in?
Well, so I think Kenan Thompson in a Saturday Night Live sketch that I quote in the book. He's like a Black staffer in Virginia, and he's gathered together all the white politicians, and he's like, okay, I need to know now who else has performed in blackface. And they all say things like, but it was the 80s.
Right.
And he's like, no, that's not. And they're like, but it was my hero. I was just doing my hero. And he's like, no, that's not acceptable. And they're like, but it really was the 80s and it was my hero. And he's like, no, it's not. So I think that sketch taps into it was whiteness on a Tuesday.
This is how, I mean, it's like, it's such, this racism and white supremacy is in every molecule of air we breathe in this country, and I feel like because I moved from Canada when I was 10 years old, and I can feel it, and I'm not saying Canada was a perfect place, but it's different. Like the air feels different because it's like, it's just it's in the water we drink. And so, it ends up being like managing an illness, like managing a cancer and figuring out the best way to do so.
Yes.
So you don't have a lot of great choices.
That's absolutely right. And that's why for me, while the book does like a kind of like tour through history, so you get like, where did this come from? Where did it start? Where did it come from? Why? but really it gives you a lot about the 21st century, because I think to get to your like molecules in the air, like it's so pervasive in the 21st century that like, again, how could you not think that this is timely? Like it's so timely that it's all the time.
It's all the time. It's all the time. And it's really like, even in, in social media. So toward the end of the book, you mentioned, which was very disturbing. Could you just talk about how some people performed allyship during Black Lives Matter?
Yeah.
I wasn't aware of this.
Yeah, there were a bunch of women and like really kind of people who have large followings on social media were performing their allyship by painting themselves in black and saying black, and then writing on their white blackened bodies, Black Lives Matter. And I include a bunch of images from these social media posts and say like, if this is how you think allyship is, like, so like, if you're just like actively a white supremacist, you put on blackface. And if you're an ally, you put on blackface. Like where's our space? Where's our space for us to be black?
And in their case, it wasn't even, in some cases, it wasn't white innocence. It was
Middle
because
Eastern.
These were people from Middle Eastern, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So, yeah.
And I will just say before people want to like say, but so that's a totally different culture. I recently did a special issue of an academic journal on blackface as a global phenomenon, including in Japan and China and the Middle East and Italy. Like, so don't think that this is something that has not touched these other countries and that they are pure or innocent or more innocent than Americans or Brits or Canadians. Actually, no. So let's just let's slay that dragon right now.
Yeah. And also, I mean, this idea of being able to, I guess, so there's racial ventriloquy, but just sort of like post-racial, even like with casting. And so like, I wanted to know what your thoughts were on Bridgerton, and if,
Well, Bridgerton, I wanted to like it. And I felt like it was a bit lazy in the way it mentioned race as a real thing in one episode in passing. And then you could be like, oh, now we don't have to talk about it. Let's go back to our Regency costumes. Woohoo! Like, so I think it probably was more of like a colorblind approach, but with this like half attempt to make it realistic. I'd rather delve into the kind of what the history really was in the period and have that fleshed out in a more full way. But I don't write television, so.
Well, I will say about Bridgerton, I mean, it was like cotton candy, and I did actually forget, like you just at certain point, especially when you're binging, you just kind of like forget, and it, my brain kept wanting to remember, but the characters had moved on, like they had moved on. So I think it. I mean, I appreciated it for that, because sometimes this is heavy and you don't want to have to think about it all the time. In the book, you also talk about the way that they protected British roles for British actors. And I think you were talking about the BBC's when they were mounting some Shakespeare. And I thought that was so interesting, because I'm like, well, that's a big issue in the United States, where a lot of people talk about the fact that you have all these Black British actors that are playing American roles. And so I don't know how, is that connected to any of this too?
I mean, I think in that case, so the BBC did a full Shakespeare films, like, so they did a film for each play, and early on they partnered up with PBS for funding, and there was an issue about who was going to play Othello, and apparently lots of people were like, oh, James Earl Jones, like, great. And the British equity actors were like, no, it must be a Black British actor. Well, it turns out like they actually had Anthony Hopkins in blackface do it in 1981, right? And so So no James Earl Jones, no Black British actor, Anthony Hopkins. Oh, Natalie, you froze. I wonder.
In blackface.
Yes. Oh, there you are. Okay. I wonder, are we supposed to open it up to the audience now?
Yes. So let's take some questions. We have about 10 more minutes. I see,
because I know you and
C.
I
Johnson,
can just talk forever.
We absolutely
Which would be fine.
can. So there's a question, it looks like, from C. Johnson. Thinking of earlier comedians, would you characterize Flip Wilson as doing minstrel in his character Geraldine?
Well, I think that's so, and this is from Bell Hooks. So, like, if you want to read the brilliant Black feminist theorist and film critic, she has a great article about why Black male comics felt the need to perform female roles early in their television careers. And she mounts an argument that it was a way for them to get in, that they were tapping into minstrel performance tropes and in their cross-dressing, and that the thing that got denigrated the most were Black women. And that was a way for Black men to elevate themselves. So I just think that Bell Hooks nailed it. So I'm not going to, go off of her argument at all.
Well, I mean, I would just sort of add to that. So one of the texts that I added to my African-American issues course this year was Patricia Turner's 2002 book, Ceramic Uncles and Celluloid Mammies, Black Images and Their Influence on Culture. And so she's a folklorist, and she sort of takes a, material culture approach to looking at these racist memorabilia, how it sort of came about. But what was so interesting about this book, she talked about how, these collecting, slavery had this afterlife through these collections of these mammies and these servile Black people. But what's interesting was she talked about the way that Black visual artists mimicked these images as well.
Yes.
Because that was how they could sell, So
Yes.
Again, it's like people are already primed for these stereotypical images. And that's why we're stuck with them, because they keep working and people keep buying them.
Right. And if you're in this capitalist system, that's the market. And I mean, I think for Black actors and for Black ceramicists, for example, to take that one example, like that there is a market, you want to be in that market. And so you're going to create the things or recreate the things that are already selling in that market. When I think the ultimate goal is to say, that's a jacked up market, we should do something else.
Right. And how do you do that? I don't know. How do you just do something else?
Yeah, right. You'd probably be hungry for a while, right?
I just wanted to remind folks since we do have a few minutes left, that they can post additional questions in the chat. And I would like to ask a question while folks might be doing that. And it's not so much a specific question, it's just I would like to get both of your thoughts on satire and how that's often this sort of one of their sort of reflexive defenses of blackface, and I appreciate the way in your conversation that you've been really presenting different ways of thinking about all of this. It's been a real conversation in that way, and I just so appreciate it. And so, and Natalie, you were talking earlier about this idea of what art is and isn't, for instance. And so, so my brain goes straight to satire.
Yeah.
What is, what isn't, what purpose might be served, if there are intentions that balance out impact, which I don't know, I think there's a lot of harm that's done, but that is a question. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think about the Ted Danson showing up to the Friars roast in blackface when he was with Whoopi Goldberg. And obviously the idea was that he felt that he could do a satire of how that comedy club, treated Blackness, and that blackface minstrelsy was part of their comic tradition, and he was going to send this up. But why do it to send it up? Like that's the part that I don't quite understand. I think, obviously there's pleasure that people get in doing blackface, and the satire seems to be the free pass. And I think this is exactly what happened in 30 Rock, where they thought that they were sending up like stupid white people by doing blackface. But again, like, why would you do that? And I think that's exactly what was happening in Tropic Thunder, the Ben Stiller movie, in which Robert Downey Jr. was in blackface for the entire movie.
And I think there was, and I'm trying to pull it out of my brain. There, in one of these texts from my class, might have been Donald Bogle's text. We're talking about the mammy stereotype. He talked about Oprah Winfrey doing a mammy, was it a pancake, Aunt Jemima sketch? And it was sort of like satirizing it. And I can't remember whether it got made or didn't, but anyway, it's erased from the art. You can't find it now. But it was even too much for her, to do this Aunt Jemima, this Aunt Jemima. And of course it's satire. Oh, it's funny, Oprah, Aunt Jemima. Oh, funny. But we finally got this year, and I thought it would never happen, where they actually got rid of, the Aunt Jemima, as a marketing tool. And that was something that, sort of come out of this great awakening that we have. And so I think people are, to sort of get back to the question about satire, I mean, I think, I hope this lasts for a very long time, where people are thinking very carefully, whether they're on this line of dancing or shuffling, or whether they're sort of revel or sort of like rolling around in offensiveness, and hurtfulness, and, doing things that are like hurtful. Are they laughing at us? Or are they laughing with us? Like, it's a very fun, I don't know where the line, I don't think and we can't draw the line necessarily, but I'm just happy people are thinking about it more.
I couldn't agree more, Natalie. I think that's the importance of this moment. The other thing that I think is powerful in this moment is that I think artists are aware of what's available on the internet now forever. And that's why Tina Fey had those 4 episodes pulled from Peacock, I think it was, or whatever streaming service. Because she's like, oh, like suddenly people are like, wait a minute. Because it's not hard to find all of these. I mean, I'm surprised about the Oprah one, but I guess I'm not surprised.
It was Saturday Night Live. And I remember trying to find it. And you couldn't find it anywhere, but I saw it referenced in this book. So I believe that it existed.
Yeah.
But, she's powerful, so she could have it erased.
That's what I was going to say. She could be. She's like a CIA operative, like it didn't exist.
I'm surprised the book is still in print, because, I'm pretty sure that I read it in that, because I tried to find it. Yeah. But so, people are more aware. So they know, like, do you really want to do this?
And do you want it there? And even if you think in this moment that you're doing a fabulous satire, like 10 years from now, when someone stumbles upon this, will they understand the context that it's satirical, or will they just see you in blackface? And will they just take a screenshot of you in blackface that will then be a meme forever? I do think that artists are more cognizant of that now than they have been in the past. And I do think that they're also having a type of reckoning and awakening, but I'm always suspicious of how long that lasts. Whereas I think their fear of images on the internet is stronger.
Well, and it's also something about this reckoning too, and I wonder for you as a scholar of drama, for Black, and there's many Netflix, YouTube. Do you think that but they seem to be going to the similar themes, and I don't know. I don't know I don't know how to form the question, but there's definitely going to be a glut that we're going to see probably like years from now. We'll be looking at these 2 years and the art that came out of it. And what I guess my question is, what is your sense of, are these images evolving, or are we sort of falling into more stereotypes, or
I don't know.
Are you seeing
I mean, though, one thing I can say is, since I work primarily with theater artists, that almost every Black playwright I know who, like, regardless of whether they were doing like crazy experimental whatever, they have been now hired by Netflix, HBO, whatever, to write television shows. And so I'm curious to see A, what they produce, and B, like, will they just get chewed up into a weird machine that makes all their work look the same, or will we have something, you know, kind of dramatically different? But literally every single Black playwright I know, which is a lot, they're all working on television right now.
Was there another question from the audience?
Yeah, yes, and it's hi, C. Johnson. I know you, but I won't say your first name since you aren't sharing it. Is asking about you mentioned global blackface, and they're curious about whether or not you cover Black Pete in Holland, and I know that you have discussed that. And if you'll just let folks know what that is if they don't, and it's a great example of how global this phenomena is.
Yeah, so this is controversial in the Netherlands. I wrote a piece with a Dutch colleague, Koen Ihes, in The Conversation. So it's available if you look up The Conversation and Ayanna Thompson, you'll find this article about Black Pete. And in that article, we kind of take on the fact that there are some people in the Netherlands who want to claim that this is not a racist tradition. And we're like, actually, it fits perfectly in this longer tradition that the Netherlands wasn't separate from the global slave trade. In fact, they were quite central to it. But Black Pete arose in the 19th century, I believe, and he is supposedly an assistant to St. Nicholas. And he's there to kind of usher in the beginning of the Christmas celebrations. And it is performed in full Black makeup. So yeah, but you can look up that article on The Conversation. And in the journal that we edit, it's also with my Dutch colleague, there is an article in there as well about the Netherlands. So
can I ask one more question?
Yes.
I know we're at 8:00, and actually just from the beginning, right? When I said, oh, and it's so cute. So it's been on my mind. I really said that, right? And we're really talking about blackface, and we're really saying that it's not cute, right? But yet this is an object, and it has blackface, and it's being sold, and it's going to be in bookstores, and people are going to be able to pick it up. So like, how do you, like, it just occurred, like, how do you start dealing with that tension?
Well, right. And I will say that there was a little back and forth with Bloomsbury about the cover design, because I wanted it to be unmistakable that this is actually about blackface. And I wanted it the whole time. I said, I want a Black background and then the face on it. So that was part of what I had hoped, because I wanted it to be something that you couldn't mistake for anything else. I will say that a colleague of mine, her 11-year-old daughter, saw the book while they were eating dinner, and she's like, what is that? And she's like, oh, it's my friend Ayanna's book. And she goes, why does it feel like it's eating my soul? And I was like, she got it. That's exactly it, right? This is smiling, but it also looks like it's going to devour you. So I don't think of it as cute. I think of it as quite menacing in some way. And that's what I hope came across.
Yeah, but it's still an object though.
Yeah.
So it's still an object.
Yep. Yeah. And it will have
it's a material object. Some people might buy it for that. Like, think of a person like having it, okay, I'm just going to put this on my little Zoom background. And, like, I'm just thinking about what are the implications of that people can have this book here.
Oh my God. I love it. So like just existing as an object as opposed to something. And then this could be their Zoom backdrop.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, you know what it made me think? Maybe you need to. This is okay. Here's a suggestion. Maybe you should do something like Jay-Z does, like when he's at his concerts and when he says the N-word, he's like, okay, all white people don't use the word, right? All Black people are okay. So Black people, is it okay for Black people to put it on their Zoom background and then not white people? See, we've talked about everybody's.
I don't think anyone should use this as their Zoom background, but everyone should buy the book from Malaprop.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'll definitely be assigning this to my students when I teach the seminar again, because it's such a slim volume, but really substantive, you know, as far as like the, you know, how the depth of the historical perspective, and brings in performance studies, which us media studies, we don't have as much there. And so, yeah, it's really useful. And then definitely the right size for all of the governor blackfaces and the, you know, Canadian prime ministers. It's just the right thing to sort of get themselves educated on the subject.
Thank you so much, Natalie. It's such a pleasure talking to you because, of course, like, you know as much about this as I do. So it's like, it's so easy for us to talk like forever.
Yes, yes. Thank you for writing the book and congratulations.
Thanks so much. And thanks, Malaprops.
Thank you. I know that you all could keep talking and I could keep listening. And so I hate to even bring things to a close, but we do want to be respectful of everyone's time. I so appreciate this conversation and the conversations that I think your conversation will spawn outside of this space as well. It is and I have one here too, it is a slim but just really impactful little volume. And I was telling Ayanna before we went on that I felt weird saying how much I enjoyed the book, because it, you know, the reading experience was at times anything but enjoyable. But I enjoyed the way you laid out the history and what's happening currently, and didn't shy away from the feeling about it, right? So it's, I mean, that's what we're getting back to. It's just, you know, what's worth making people feel terrible. Is sort of where we can circle back to and sort of and think about, right? Yeah. So maybe let's just err on the side of not making people feel bad. Is, you know, where we end up with. So thank you both so much for your work and your books, and for being educators. Perhaps most of all, thank you. And for, again, engendering more conversation in this space and outside.